Well, Canonites, after 9 years and all sorts of speculation, the Halo television series is finally on the horizon. The first official trailer dropped a couple months ago, and with the second one slated for this upcoming Sunday, 343 have dropped the first in a series of posts diving into details surrounding the series. Called Silver Debriefs, the first one dives into a lot of detail about the setting of the TV show, how it relates to canon, and the reasons why 343 went this route. Naturally, we'll be breaking down all these details in just a moment. However, in addition to covering this debrief, I wanted to outline some of the things I'm looking forward to in the TV show, especially now that some of the larger uncertainties surrounding it are clarified in the aforementioned post. So, let's dive in. The best place to start, I think, is with an exploration of where this show will take place in relation to other Halo media. As you've likely heard by now, the Halo TV series is set in what's being referred to as the Silver Timeline, separate from the main continuity of Halo's games, books, comics, and the vast majority of other media. The name is a reference to both the Silver Screen and Silver Team, the Spartans that will be accompanying the Master Chief in the series. We'll talk more about them later. The idea behind the Silver Timeline was to allow the show's writers the freedom of pulling from the vast wealth of Halo's lore without being tied down by it. While I maintain that there's plenty of creative freedom to be found within the Human Covenant War still, seriously, just look at how barren some of these years are in terms of events. There's so much to fill in, never mind that this is essentially what 343 has to do anytime anyone wants to tell a story set during the Human Covenant War. The decision is likely a result of competing wants and desires from both 343 and their television partners. In other words, as much as I disagree with the underlying idea that the show has to be its own canon, it seems like that's the reality of getting a Halo TV show at all. Still, I wish this discussion didn't have to come the year the show premieres. I wish 343 could have been more upfront and clear about this show taking place in its own continuity. Looking back at old interviews, I'd say it's obvious that 343 were already looking at the TV show as its own continuity even 3 years ago. Knowing this for certain ahead of time could have saved a lot of people a lot of headaches, and generally helped parts of the community come into the show with a much healthier mindset, myself included. Anyway, the article has a huge interview with Frank O'Connor, Halo's franchise development director, about the making of the show, the decision behind the Silver Timeline, and all of that. I've touched on the main points here, but if you want to hear everything Frankie had to say, check out the full article on Halo Waypoint. One last detail to keep in mind, however, is that new ideas, characters, etc. from the Halo TV show could always appear in the games, books, and other media that make up the core canon. How these things manifest in core canon versus the Silver Timeline will vary, but if we see a new vehicle, for example, in the TV show, it's not unrealistic that that could appear in the games as well. Following interviews with Kiki Wolfkill and Frank O'Connor, the article proceeds to reveal some of the new canon created for the show, starting with the mysterious craft we saw at the start of the TV show trailer. The craft is known as a Zheng-He-class courier, this one belonging to Dr. Halsey herself. According to Ken Peters, a senior franchise writer, the ship is called the Endymion II, named after Halsey's homeworld, which itself took its name from a shepherd in Greek mythology. As noted, this ship, though premiering in the Silver Timeline first, can appear in future core canon stories if 343 ever wish. In addition to the ship's name and class, Mr. Peters also notes that the planet we see it flying over will be, quote, both familiar and alien to longtime fans, which seems to hint at the planet being one we know from the core canon, though perhaps represented differently here. Perhaps this is a reimagined Sigma Octantis 4. Interestingly too, the article refers to the structures we see on the ground as ruins, so this may be the site of a Forerunner artifact. After that, we focus on this scene from the trailer, which, as I think many people guessed, is set on Reach. While the city remains unnamed for the moment, its design was inspired by locations like New Alexandria and others seen in Halo Reach and Halo The Fall of Reach, the animated series. In the distance, we can spot what's called White Tower, a FleetCom operations center and relay hub. The city apparently saw a lot of growth and expansion due to the increased demand the Human Covenant War put on the UNSC. This location once again does exist in the core canon, albeit in a glass state, and it obviously never held the narrative significance that it will in the TV show. Hopefully, if it wasn't clear before, it is clear now how the Silver Canon and Core Canon work together. Next up, the article talks a bit about Dr. Halsey and how she'll be portrayed by actress Natasha McElhone. As I think any fan would be excited to hear, Ms. McEllen was apparently very interested and very invested in the character, asking tons of questions about the character and eager to explore her relationships with other key characters. She was also a critical collaborator when it came to the design and layout of Halsey's lab and the books and artifact found in the Good Doctor's quarters. It makes me rather excited for the final performance, I must admit. Following that, we get a little information on the new design for High Charity. While its general shape and appearance are recognizable, the Holy City has some notable changes, such as the light running up its central spine. There's not a whole lot to comment on when it comes to what we've seen, but from the article, it seems like we might get to see a lot of High Charity, this 3D model being elaborately detailed. After that, we get some new details on the Rubble, the collection of asteroids seen in the trailer that were home to the citizens of Madrigal, a world glassed by the Covenant in 2528, at least in the core canon. The Rubble orbited a gas giant in the same system as Madrigal, called Hesiod, which I assume is the planet we see in the background. The Rubble doesn't feature much in core canon outside of Halo the Cole Protocol, the collection of asteroids destroyed in 2535. In the Silver timeline, however, the Rubble seems to have survived much longer and will play a much larger role, being the pirate lair of former Spartan Soren 066. Excitedly, the article notes that Soren's backstory from the story Pariah from Halo Evolutions is directly relevant to his Silver timeline counterpart. And speaking of Spartans, it's only appropriate that we close out this section with a look at Silver Team, the Spartans who will be fighting alongside the Master Chief for this series. Comprised of Spartans Riz 028, Kai 125, and Vanek 134, the names and backgrounds for these Spartans were pulled from 343's internal documentation on the Spartan 2 program, which is to say that they have core canon counterparts that would likely have lived very different lives than the ones we'll see on screen. As for their armor, the Mjolnir these Spartans are clad in is custom made and practical, all meant to give a greater sense of realism in the final show. Real costumes have their drawbacks, but it all depends on how things are executed. And that, I think, is a perfect segue into the final part of this video, the stuff I'm looking forward to seeing. When the Halo TV series was announced, we were led to believe that it would be part of the core canon. That understanding has shaped pretty much all of my reactions to the news and updates surrounding the series. Now that we know beyond any doubt that the series has its own continuity, I can get excited about the show itself. My enjoyment will still be diminished to a degree since the series is part of its own timeline. I'm sorry, but canon is a major part of how I enjoy media, especially stuff like Halo. But there are a lot of things the show could potentially do that I've wanted to see realized for a long time. And to start, I think what I'm most excited about is the potential to actually see naval battles play out. The Halo novels are full of exciting fights between individual ships and entire fleets, but outside of a few clips and comics, we never really get to see a major naval battle play out on screen. Not in any meaningful way, at least. I think the closest we've come to that is the fight between the Commonwealth and Unrelenting in the Fall of Reach animated series. With Jacob Keyes being a major part of the series, we might even get to see the Keyes loop brought to life, which would be exciting no matter what. Second, I'm excited to see some well-choreographed Spartan fights. We've seen some cool examples of how Spartans can fight between the games and animated media, but we rarely get to focus on these fights all that much. I hope the show can give us more spectacular Spartan fighting, maybe even showing off a version of Spartan Time, aka how Spartans perceive the world. You remember that scene of Peter Parker and Flash Thompson fighting in the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man? That's basically Spartan Time. And on the subject of Spartans, I'd also be excited to see them act as a tactical unit. Big flashy fights are fun, but Spartans are special ops soldiers at the end of the day. To steal an example from a friend of mine, the fan-made Astartes series that used to be on YouTube depicts the Space Marines of Warhammer 40k as highly efficient and lethal soldiers. Basically a perfect template for how Spartan 2s specifically should operate. Halo 5's Blue Team intro is also a pretty good example of what I hope to see from the TV show. Finally, at least for today, I'm excited for Soren and the Rubble. Soren 066 is up there as one of the most interesting Spartan 2s for me, and it's sad that we never heard more about him in the main canon. As much as I would love a core canon Soren story someday, I'm still excited to see what the show does with Soren and how he'll interact with his former comrades. The Rubble 2 was one of the more interesting locations in the lore, even though it only featured in one novel. To see more of it explored, to visit familiar locations, and to see how it all might contrast to the Rubble we know from the main canon, that's all exciting to me. Like in the main canon, the Rebel once had an AI named Juliana, who in 2535 was on the verge of rampancy. Maybe she'll still be in the show. In short, even if you aren't a fan of how the show is being produced, there can be a lot to look forward to and ideas that could positively impact Halo beyond just the TV show. With that, I think we can bring this first Silver Debrief to a close. We still have a ways to go before the TV show premieres, but it feels like we're almost there. As noted, a second trailer for the show will be dropping this Sunday, January 30th, during the AFC Championship game on CBS and Paramount Plus, and you can bet that I'll be breaking down every detail I can extract from that trailer. Until then, though, let me know where you stand on the Halo TV show at the moment. Are you excited, still skeptical, somewhere in between? Share your thoughts in the comments below. For now, though, stick around for that Patreon shoutout, and until next time, this has been Halo Canon. First, I'd like to give a big thank you to our Horospis patrons. First, there's Hope, then we have Freight, Discombobulated Sycophant, Justin Montgomery, Men in the Dark, Keisha Dila, Daddy Anarchy, Great Scott Productions, Jumpy Sucks Balls, Ever Corrado, and Embezzled True 1010. Thank you all for your amazing support of the channel. Next, I'd like to thank our theoretical patrons. If you'd like to see your name here or get a direct shoutout, check out patreon.com/halocanon. You can simply support the channel or get additional benefits, such as behind-the-scenes materials, including raw audio for upcoming videos, or even shoutouts like this. All patrons now get early access to certain videos as well, and your Patreon title will appear in the Halo Canon Discord. However, your continued viewership is more than enough for me. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, and maybe even subscribing to the channel if you aren't already. If you really enjoy my stuff, turn on that notification bell so you can be among the first to see new videos when they release. But for all my fellow Canonites, keep on being awesome.